It's my great pleasure to welcome you to our session, Recovering Resilience, Sustainability, Growth and Energy Access, big topics that are at a critical moment in time. 5 years before the 2030 agenda should conclude, we are seeing that many of the Sustainable Development Goals are not on track to be achieved. If we don't accelerate action on sustainable development, we will miss these targets as a global community. At the same time, there are signs of hope. We are seeing a renewable energy revolution. However, the distribution of the benefits of this renewable energy revolution, the green growth, is heavily marked by inequality. So there needs to be a lot of effort to overcome this and also have more diversified benefits of renewable energy growth throughout our globe and throughout our communities. Looking at the Mediterranean is both a hotspot for climate change, but it's also one of those renewable energy hubs. And we are talking today from very different perspectives. You've heard our speakers to talk a little bit how from different countries we're looking at the Mediterranean and how the North-South cooperation can be made more strongly. I would like to start this panel with the question of how we can ensure increases in financing for development, including especially for this green energy transition, and what institutional governance changes are needed to unlock also more private investments in renewable energies from north to south. And Mr. Nasheed, I would like to start with you to answer this question.
Well, thank you very much. And first, I would like to send my condolences to the families who've lost lives in the airplane crash this morning. How do we get the money to our countries, especially for the renewable energy transition? First, we need good projects. Countries need to do good project preparations. Projects that are bankable, financially viable. Now, none of these projects can be standing alone and become financially viable. There is always a gap, and this gap needs to come from development finance. In the past, we've spent a lot of money on development, but that goes into doing complete projects. So what I'm suggesting is don't do complete projects, just get the gap financed so that the private sector and the private investor would find it bankable. I also think that we have a legacy issue on PPAs, power purchasing agreements. Many of our countries have given power purchasing agreements in the last 2 decades or so. And this was done at a cost. These were fossil fuel power purchasing agreements. This was done at about 16 cents, 17 cents a unit. But renewables are now 6 cents, 7 cents a unit. Now, our countries, I must mention, I am the Secretary General for the Climate Vulnerable Forum, and we are 74 countries. And we are headquartered in Accra, Ghana, and it's a beautiful place to live. The music is good, the food is excellent, the people are great. I think everyone should visit the country. After that, how do we restructure these IPPs? Because of the IPPs, the independent power, our countries are in debt to the IPPs. And it's a huge debt. I mean, any African country, Asian country, they have huge amounts that they owe to the IPPs. And because of this debt, we are unable to attract new investors into our countries. So let's restructure the debt first, and in the process, bring in renewables. And I think it's very easily doable. Secondly, or thirdly, cost of finance. If we were to do the same project in Ghana as we were to do it in Germany, you would find that the cost of finance would be twice in Ghana or in any of our countries. agencies, international financial institutions would say that it's because of political risks. Yes, we have a lot of coups and we have a lot of toppling governments and so on. But there's never been an instance where they have not got their money back. You can ask the World Bank, have they ever not got their money back? So financial guarantees on these projects are very, very important. Another issue is exchange rate fluctuations and the loss that comes from. Again, this has to be hedged and it needs to be guaranteed. So without going into more details, finally, I would say to our governments, do not terminate contracts. Every time you change government, you don't have to go and terminate the previous contract. And that's finding it difficult for us to attract new investors. So in short, this is what I like to say.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ang. From an OECD perspective, how does that ring with you? And what do you think are the bottlenecks to increase finance?
Thank you so much, Kira, and congratulations to ORF and Samir and the governments of India and France for co-hosting such an important discussion. Listen, just as a 30-second introduction, I just want to say that India has been a key partner to the OECD since 2007, and we've been actively engaging with India. And I've been attending Raisina dialogue for a decade, and it's fantastic to see that Raisina and India have come to France in this important and very timely conversation. So first of all, congratulations. And I echo every point that Mohamed Nasheed has just stressed. There's an unprecedented investment opportunity in emerging markets. It could lay the ground for the growth story of the 21st century, or it could just miss it. And I mean, we're talking about, in emerging markets, $5.5 trillion just to meet development priorities annually. And indeed, international investors are starting to recognize and have an appetite for investing in the clean energy transition in emerging markets. There's been incremental progress, but we haven't seen the transformative shifts needed. And I think to answer very plainly your question, there's no shortage of global availability capital, but the financial system and the global international financial architecture is misaligned with the need to shift private capital flowing from north to south in support of development and clean energy transition objectives. There's a need for mobilizing all sources, whether public, private, or a blend of both, but to more broadly align the financial system. I don't want to repeat points that you just very rightly stressed, so let me just highlight 2 points and also congratulate you for all your long-standing leadership on the topic, along with many other stakeholders in the panel and in the room. 2 points. The first one that echoes what you were saying on the de-risking. Development finance institutions need to play a stronger role in mobilizing private capital for development in emerging markets, including in the Mediterranean region. Just to give you one number, OECD data shows that only 18% of the financial instruments in the portfolio of development finance has a private finance mobilization as a main objective. What does it mean? It means that MDBs and donors continue to focus on direct lending of a mobilization. That means increasing the use of blended finance, such as guarantee, and a range of guarantee instruments are perfectly suitable for clean energy transition and other de-risking instruments. The second point I want to emphasize is a bit more, from an OECD perspective, we have to recognize that there are unintended consequences to some financial regulations that were set in place. In the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, there were very important financial regulations set up to ensure financial stability, such as Basel III for banks and Solvency II, and these are critically fundamental. But we have evidence accumulating over the past decade that there has been unintended consequence in constraining, one, access to long-term 10-year debt for capital-intensive renewable infrastructure projects and other low-emissions infra projects, and two, constraining access to such projects, especially in emerging markets, given the treatment of guarantees. So I just want to focus on those two for now, and we can continue the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Gala. What is your perspective from India on this? India has made great steps in renewable energies in the infrastructure sector, also in the sort of green infrastructure, yet more finance and private finance is also needed. How can these ties be strengthened for more private investments, also from areas like the Mediterranean or other places of the global north, to contribute to the green growth?
Before I answer that, let me just talk about the scale of the challenge first. Based on the figures that I've seen, developing countries alone require $9.2 trillion to meet their commitments on the SDGs by 2030, where the current inflows are only about 5.24 trillion. So there's a huge gap to meet the requirements. If that gap has to be financed by somebody, or those goals are not going to be met. It's that simple. Climate-specific requirements alone are also very enormous. India needs over 10 trillion to reach net zero by 2070, and 2.5 trillion required just to meet the 2030 targets. So that's also a huge amount of money that needs to be financed. Cost of capital disparity is also very critical. Developing countries pay approximately double the interest rates compared to developed nations, creating fundamental barriers to green investments. So the institutions of governance and global finance must fundamentally change to meet these requirements. The current architecture is inadequate for the 4.2 trillion annual financing gap and cannot effectively channel the necessary private capital from north to the south. Success requires comprehensive reforms that address both the quantity of available finance and the quality of institutions that direct it towards sustainable development objectives. Recognizing that this is fundamentally a question of policy, regulation, and institutional alignment rather than capital availability is also very important. If we want to look at an action plan, implementation priorities, in the immediate actions for the next 0 to 2 years, we need to implement multi-development bank capital optimization, execute G20 recommendations on capital adequacy frameworks, and initiate governance reforms immediately. Establish dedicated blended finance facilities, which means to create sector-specific facilities with clear private sector mobilization criteria and risk mitigation instruments, and to develop coherent policy frameworks, all in the next 2 years. In the next 2 to 5 years, the medium term, we need to pursue comprehensive architecture reform, transforming international financial systems, including debt governance and credit rating methodologies. We need to build genuine technology partnerships, establish long-term capacity building programs rather than simple equipment transfers. Today, to even manufacture the equipment outside of China, for instance, is very difficult because we don't have access to the technology, we don't have access to the manufacturing equipment to manufacture the parts. So the whole world is becoming an assembler of components coming from China today for all of these green technologies. So how do we actually ensure that there's a fair transfer of technology taking place and capability building is done in the developing countries also? So we're not only importing, but we're also manufacturing and creating opportunities within our country while we meet these goals.
Let me just add another question before I move down to the other speakers. So do you think the links between economic security, climate action, and energy access are already being built? And will they redefine how we think about development policy?
You want me to continue? Yes, of course. So I think India is at a critical juncture in its development trajectory. It's among the fastest growing major economies with a projected growth rate of 6.5% in FY25. However, per capita energy consumption is just about 25% of the global average and 1/17 of the developed countries. Our demand is expected to grow rapidly, placing stress on both supply and sustainability. India still faces energy access gaps in rural and underserved areas. At the same time, almost 75% is generated from coal, and from cities like Delhi and Mumbai face severe air pollution because of this. This results in a rising public health burden and productivity loss. The silver lining is that renewables are now cheaper than coal, with solar tariffs in India as low as 2.1 rupees per unit or $0.025 per unit, as the minister was saying, among the lowest globally right now. India's commitments to COP26 are under Panchmarit also set a clear roadmap for 2030, 500 gigawatts of non-fossil capacity, 50% of energy from renewables, a 45% reduction in emission intensity, and reduction of CO2 emissions by 1 billion tons. The long-term target is to achieve net zero by 2070. So as we go through this, I think all of the imperatives are also merging. It's not only about the environment, it's about our requirement for energy has to be diversified and has to include a large percentage of renewables as well as nuclear and many other sources other than fossil fuel and coal. And I think the context for us is we are probably the most affected from global warming and the impact of global warming. But at the same time, how much we're contributing to global warming is still very low compared to developed world because our energy consumption is low. Now, as that changes, how do we ensure that we have the finances available to make the necessary investments to grow that requirement, the capacity, while still maintaining our strategic development goals?
Thank you. I would like to ask Mr. Krapper also to come in on this link between economic security, energy access, climate action. As former Minister of Energy for Ghana, what are your experiences in shaping these links, in communicating these links, and getting finance also for projects that combine these imperatives?
Thank you very much, Kira. And like the Prime Minister, our thoughts go with the victims of the plane crash. And we thank also our conveners for bringing these conversations together. Kira, you ask a very complex question. And I think it is an important question. The components of the matter that you want us to speak to are each essential for the transition. And I think at the heart of it is the question of economic security and energy access. And here you're essentially talking about electricity as a socioeconomic good. Those people who lack access to electricity are essentially cut off from the opportunities that otherwise would have been available to them for socioeconomic impact. You're talking about a deprivation of opportunities in jobs, healthcare, education, startups. You're cut off from the digital economy, which itself opens significant opportunities to persons who have access to such technologies. And so it is important. The oft-quoted figure of 500 to 700 million, depending on who is speaking about Africans, for instance, persons living on the African continent who do not have access to electricity comes to the fore. And you need to pay attention to that. Of course, we have to build into the access question also affordability. I recall in my time as Minister for Trade, when we were championing the African Continental Free Trade Area, I used to speak from one African country to the other, calling on governments to bring down the cost of power, as that inhibits, production and production at scale. And then in no time, I found myself in the Ministry of Energy. And then suddenly I found that there wasn't such a simple question to say that cost of power. It's as if the president was listening to me and wanted to teach me a lesson that talk is cheap. But cost of power is a question that we really also need to talk about, because if you can't afford it, then you don't have access to it. The other important link that I think we need to pay attention to also is the economic security and the climate action question. And I think there too, you're really talking about decarbonization, and 75%, about 2/3 of the emissions come directly from the energy sector. So there again, in trying to link economic security and climate action, you see energy jumping back into the equation, and it paints the picture very clearly that the three are very directly linked to sustainable development, and we can't, bat pay attention and expedite action in that regard. Otherwise, if we failed to decarbonize, the sea levels will rise higher than we're seeing, further droughts, food insecurity will become a more deepened matter. Water scarcity will become a more deepened matter, and you have a global economic, financial catastrophe on your hands. So the question is very directly linked, and whatever efforts we put in have to tackle them together. On the institutional level, you're seeing some work being done. The World Economic Forum continues to stress that energy security and financial security are together. It's a conversation we need to have together. At the UN level, you know that the Energy Compact is also tackling mobilizing funding for green and clean energy technologies together with climate issues. The World Bank's Clean Energy Investment Framework is doing the same work. And so at the institutional level, you see some effort there, whereby energy access, clean energy, and climate mitigation questions are being tackled together. But we have to do more. There's significant work that needs to be done. And we need to be more practical and more pragmatic. We need to see more investment in renewables. We need to see more investment in off-grid technologies. We need to harmonize private sector and public sector efforts. And as the earlier speakers, the Prime Minister and Geraldine have already talked about financing, and they've traveled the road extensively. I don't want to go back there, but financing, innovative, green bond, local currency funding. We need to bring innovative funding into the mix, and governments and public sector policymakers also have to curate policies that dismantle the barriers that sit in between these different factors, so that the solution is more holistic. And I'm sure that we can expedite action towards sustainable development.
Thank you for these really interesting remarks. I would like to turn to Minister Falson. I would like to learn a little bit more from your perspective how Malta assesses this nexus between security, prosperity, sustainability. What is your experience?
First of all, thank you to the organizers. It's an honor to be here, and particularly with CMA, CGM, who have operated through Malta Freeport for these last, I believe, 35 years. If I look at just the term sustainable development, we tend to look at it as there being a struggle between the two. We want to develop. Is it sustainable? And that, I think, underlies the notion of what we are talking about. We all know what we would like to see. But if there is one rule which is golden, is that the only constant is change. So whether that be climate change, whether that be political change, whether that be economic direction. And to come to your question, if we look at what we all talk about as a green transition, what we tend to experience, or what we are seeing, is that it serves to homogenate rather than to include people in the society, in the country. I'm responsible for social policy, so excuse me, I might not be that economic driven, I might be a bit social driven. Well, coming from a country which has a population of 500,000, quite small, heavily populated, with no many resources, we have one good resource. And that is a good resource for all of us, and in which we should all invest as well. And that is our human resources. At the end of the day, whatever politics we do, whatever economics we do, we should all aim, and I believe we all aim at, maybe in different ways, at bettering our societies. With us, we import all our energy, either directly or indirectly. We are connected to the European grid by means of an interconnector. We are working on a second interconnector And we import LNG, liquefied gas, to generate through our power station. So with us, connectivity is it's our bloodline. I mean, we're off the continent, so that brings its own challenges. Not having your own resources, that brings its own challenges. From the local context, which you indicate, I should have a look. What we did and what we strongly believe in, well, believe it or not, our energy prices have not changed since 2013. Never. Neither during COVID, neither the conflict in Ukraine and Russia. Indeed, today in Malta, you pay 25% less for your energy than you did in 2012. And sometimes people say, but that costs money. Sure. But I think we also need to look a bit far ahead. There is always a cost of doing nothing. So we did invest in that. We did subsidize prices. Some of our European partners weren't very happy with that. But we still believe that that is the way forward. And if we really want to have a successful green transition, if we really want to have a successful digital transition, and all what we all aim for is that we should go for the politics of inclusion rather than the politics of perception. I'm not criticizing the United States, but the United States politics is often described as being politics was all about perception. With us, especially in our limited roles, we should be the politics of inclusion. And that goes for us, I believe, goes for the richer countries, goes for the what we might consider as being poorer countries, but that should be an aim which we should all strive for. And that, I believe, would try to do away with the notion of there being a struggle between development and sustainability.
Politics of inclusion. Mr. Nasheed, does this resonate with you? And how is this nexus of economic security, climate action, and energy access being discussed in the Climate Vulnerable Forum?
Thank you. You see, in the last 80 years, developed countries have invested heavily to control fossil fuel resources. And suddenly we are finding that they are not so economic anymore. Fossil fuel is at 16, 17 cents, and renewable energy is now at 6 cents. So if you've invested 80 years on controlling fossil fuel, and suddenly you find that this is redundant, these are stranded assets. The whole of your 80 years of control has meant that they've controlled a stranded asset. When the price is so different, like twice, why is investments not coming to renewables? I think part of the reason is because they have invested so heavily on controlling fossil fuels. So we need a new world order. And as the United States go into isolation, I think that's a good thing for us. And I think our countries now must stand on our own feet. And you're asking, should money flow from north to south? I think money should flow from south to south. Africa is finding a whole lot of investors from India and on renewables, and they are interested in it. And they know that they can make a return out of it. And they also know that they can navigate the politics of the turbulent politics of our countries. So as long as you want to control renewable or fossil fuel resources, then we would always have less for renewables. If we cannot develop our society, our countries, and if we can't find prosperity for our people, they're bound to come up and challenge us. You're seeing it in all over in Africa and in Asia. And Africa is importing raw material, almost the earth, without any processing. And they have all the critical minerals for the green energy transition. Indonesia used to do the same thing, and they were getting $6 billion out of their minerals. Then they banned it. They said no. Now they get $60 billion. Now, sooner or later, Africa is going to do this. And when it's done, you will be locked out of these critical minerals. Africa needs processing in Africa. Our climate vulnerable countries who has the critical minerals must add value to the minerals at their own place and start doing it. The answer to your question is yes.
We are still seeing some struggles with interconnectedness, especially also financing for transmission grids is a challenge. And I want to come back to you to ask you, how can this be overcome? And also, where do you see the role for the OECD, for example, in contributing to solutions and maybe not sort of clawing to the fossil fuel production?
Thank you so much, Kira. Super important questions. And just to say that the OECD has been supporting actively countries such as Egypt, but also many other emerging markets to unlock investment in renewable energy. And so maybe I'll flag two lessons. The first one will very much echo points that Ministers Krapa and Falzon stressed. And to pick up on an expression that Abigail said in the inaugural session, if there's one topic that very unfortunately is not very sexy these days, it's action on climate change. And you know it better than anyone, Kara. The good news, I think, is that an increasing number of markets recognize that the clean energy transition is not just a climate imperative, it's an economic necessity from the perspective of energy security. I mean, think about the energy security Europe would have achieved if it had done its clean energy transition before Russia's war in Ukraine. And I could name so many countries that face the same challenge. Think about the economic competitiveness, the power system resilience. I mean, we saw, massive power shortages happening recently. So that's, I think, the first key point that the ministers echoed. And I think it's a very critical one to unlock wind and energy investment, to recognize the perspective and the co-benefits of the renewable energy transition. The second one is very directly linked to your question on transmission grid financing. Is, of course, you need to strengthen the enabling conditions to create a pipeline of bankable clean energy projects. But it is of no good and no use if those projects are stuck because there's not enough transmission grid to integrate it. And I want to flag, I mean, it may not be an obvious topic, that transmission grid financing has become the #1 bottleneck worldwide across all countries for the integration of grid-scale renewable power. And it's compounded by challenges of debt sustainability that Mohamed Shafid alluded to. It's compounded by the challenge of the financial situation of many utilities and their structure and cost revenue structures to keep energy prices low, that they don't have a revenue model that allow them to pick up sufficient investment. So I just want to give one number, which is that in the next 2 decades, the world will need to add or refurbish 80 million kilometers of power lines. That's the equivalent of the entire transmission and distribution grid system globally. If you take the example of Egypt, it's indispensable for Egypt to become a clean hydrogen hub and export hydrogen. So that's a topical priority. And I'd say you have to be pragmatic in how to finance transmission grid infrastructure, neither from, a completely unbundling of the electricity sector, which is no longer realistic in most countries, nor relying exclusively on public finance. And I just want to stress that at the OECD, we're doing tons of analysis to support Egypt and other countries in identifying, for example, independent transmission projects and the generation-linked transmission model. But maybe I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, mobile phones and telephone lines. Developed countries spend billions on a grid, and suddenly someone found a way of communicating without the grid. Someone's bound to find distributing electricity without the grid.
Thank you for this example. I just want to prepare you to ask questions to our panel, so please get ready. And I would like to turn to Minister Falzon also to elaborate a little bit on Malta's effort on this issue of enhancing connectivity and sustainability, and how does Malta's strategic location come into play on this?
Well, as I said before, with us, connectivity is really the essence. Well, if there is, where the wars still is, but maybe of a lesser geopolitical importance, is the position of Malta. We lie smack in the middle of the Mediterranean. About 60 miles to the north, you get to Sicily, 180 miles to the south, you're in Libya. So despite the lack of natural resources, we not only are we looking forward to having our own connection to the grid until it comes without the grid, okay? But also being if you like, a meeting point where we can transfer energy from North Africa. But our climate is good, like Marseille, for example, solar energy. With us, the problem with solar energy is the size. So we are looking at investing at offshore solar energy. Now, we know that there are offshore wind turbines, but also we tend to have very deep sea. So it's about being creative. And we are, in fact, there is a call as for international actors as well, because the investment is definitely high, to go towards floating solar energy. And making that not only feeding, if you like, the local need, there is also talk at the moment, and perhaps we should look a bit more at what is being and what can be the potential in North Africa, where you have vast expanses of deserts which can really give solar energy. But technology is always ongoing, so that is something which we must always keep. Just one last social point. Somebody or a few of us came to political issues, whatever they are. And for us, let me talk about maybe the European ones. If we look at what is going on and the political sphere, where the shifts are going, whatever your political beliefs, we need to really take care of our people. And definitely, access to energy is something which is existential in today's world. So looking at it at the larger picture will help us even solve the parts of the picture.
Thank you. Now is the time for you to come into this conversation. So please raise your hand. Yes, in the back there, please. Lady in the back. Yeah, thank you. Please introduce yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much for this interesting conversation. My name is Alizé Parnet. I'm a senior advisor to the operations director, French Development Agency. I have one question based on resilience that is also people-oriented. And I had a question that is more about the adaptation that is actually constructed by those local communities. How can we actually strengthen the influence of those knowledge? And my second question is also based on this community lens. How do you assess the non-economic losses and damages that climate change is bringing? Thank you.
Thank you. We will collect a few questions. Please,
okay, thank you very much. I'm Karim Dahou. I'm also from the OECD, Deputy Director of Global Relations. And in fact, it's more of a comment, but I would wish to listen to some reactions by the panel, and it's about the economic competitiveness case for global energy, renewable energy in general, and solar in particular. In fact, it's becoming by far the most cost-effective source of energy. The price per kilowatt hour has decreased from €3 to 30 cents in just 10 years. And the tetra watt hour has shifted from 100 to 2,000 in just a few years, compared to decades for coal and gas alike. So yes, the potential is very strong, and notwithstanding the fact that it's capital intensive from the outset, over the life cycle of the facility, it's much more profitable. Now, my question is about how some of the panelists, and especially I think Mohamed Nasheed will be interested in these, and also Herbert Krapa because of the African potential for developing solar power.
Thank you. Youssef Sharif, Columbia University and Phillips University. My question is to Minister Falzon. You mentioned the solar energy, and I mean all around you in Malta, and I mean Tunisia, Libya, Algeria, but especially Tunisia and Algeria, where it's peaceful. There are a lot of projects for solar plants. Are there joint projects with Malta or future joint projects with Malta? Thank you.
Hi. Please keep it brief. Thank you.
Josiane Koutair from Malta also, and I wanted to emphasize the aspect of competitiveness. This was asked. So how are we going to make our market more ready? The EU is imposing certain legislation. So sometimes maybe we need to push via policies, not only penalties or obligations, but also policies. So to the persons coming from non-EU countries, what are your countries doing when it comes to incentivizing renewable and green energy? And then the point on the importance of digital skills, not only eco skills, because we know that cybersecurity issues are there and are increasing. So we really need to put this in our education system to make sure that these attacks, we can prepare for them. And last point, the social aspect is key. And definitely, I wanted to ask the other panelists, like, what do you think when it comes to the social aspect should be done more? Malta gave good examples, but what from your perspective should be done more? Because solar, the social and the economic and green should really go together, also in line with the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Can I just say on the nature-based solutions for adaptation? I was walking down near the beach, and like us, probably like you, we have built these huge breakwaters. I also did go swimming and try to have a look if you had any corals. It's $7,000 a meter to build a breakwater in the Maldives. It's $25 a meter to grow a reef, $5 a meter to implant a mangrove. And you get the same results.
Let's go down this way. And please, those are the final remarks.
Reacting to the gentleman's question. Well, local have taken quite a few initiatives. Let's start on the local scene. You have had repetitive schemes where government subsidizes the purchase of your solar panels. We also have a scheme where government will guarantee what you will get back. So if it goes down, as my colleague here explained, going down, you know that the part you invested in, you can get it over three, whatever the time is. International, yes, cooperation, yes, that is definitely the way forward. It's still, I would say, not in the early stages, but it's still emerging in North African countries. And yes, we do look forward to having cooperation. And if need be, why not? Let us connect to each other after all. That's what we should all do at the very end. We are all, or so we believe, we are all humans.
I think renewable projects, the gentleman is right, would ultimately be the answer. We in Ghana have really been focusing on a government-led approach. We have the floating solar project in Ghana. We have the largest rooftop solar on the continent, which I had the duty to commission as minister. We're doing significant off-grid technologies and investments. We have access of nearly 90%, and we're using last-mile technologies to complete the access ratio. And we believe that green investment would help us to reach that last mile. I think the solution is before us. If you, and President Nasheed was talking about it earlier, if you ask a country like ours, Ghana, to leave our fossil fuels stranded, you're essentially saying that the impact that fossil hydrocarbons have made on our economy in the last 20 years or so since its discovery, you're essentially saying that I should abandon that. But also we have an ethical responsibility to contribute to the global effort, and we're doing so. We've converted all our power plants to gas, which has been classified as a transition fuel. And so our power plants all run on gas now to complement the renewables that we have coming in. And we know that the conversations must continue to the point where all the promises that have been made in terms of financing green technologies, we will start to see some of the effort. We provide subsidies as well for renewable projects, solar panels, the net tariffs as well. So you use the grid, and then whenever you want, back the power, there's a subsidy on it. So we're looking at the picture comprehensively in Ghana, and we're hoping that we can see more and more initiative in terms of financing. Sorry, but I have to mention also, President talked about being ready with projects. In my time as minister, that was one of the key things that I championed, being ready with projects. And so we have a framework which identifies about 50 projects that are ready to go in Ghana. And once we have suitable financing, we can get off the ground. And I believe many other African countries are emulating that effort. Thank you.
So I think we've already established that the cost of production is at par or less than fossil fuels. But I think if we look at it from an India perspective, it doesn't rain every day. It doesn't, the wind doesn't blow every day. So energy storage systems are also very important. At least 20% of the capacity, if you have a storage capability, you can handle those type of fluctuations in demand and also supply from the renewable source. More than that, I think, in previous sessions we were talking about diversification of supply chains. And I think that's also very important here. Today, if you look at the solar supply chain, everything from materials to processing the materials to manufacturing the solar cells and all the equipment that goes along with it, 80% is being controlled by one country in China. So as I was saying earlier, it's not just about having a low cost, but it's about being able to distribute the capabilities across multiple players and having the ability to have a market that, regardless of security issues, regardless of geopolitical issues or anything else, that supply doesn't get hampered. Technology has to be transferred. Manufacturing bases have to be set up across different geographies in different continents. And that's the only way that we'll really achieve the energy security.
Thank you. Three very, very brief points. The first one is to address the last question, there's a range of economic and financial instruments that can help improve the cost of capitals of renewable power projects. Two, very interesting, the comments that President Nasheed made on getting off grid with some more leapfrogging like the phone. And I fully agree with him that there are very innovative community level financing options for mini grids in renewable. I'm starting a project with South Africa right now exactly on that topic that enable to leapfrog the incapacity to fill the massive transmission grid financing gap. And I think it also connects to the point made in the last question on ensuring energy access, affordability, and reconciling social issues with the energy transition. And I think the last point is talking about the link to a just energy transition. I find that the experience of launching country platforms for just energy transitions, be it in Egypt with the NWEFI, be it in Indonesia, South Africa with the JETPs, are very interesting to ensure ownership from the country's perspective and ensuring that just element. That's absolutely critical to make the clean energy transition work. Thank you.
Thank you. We started this session with the question on how to recover resilience. We talked about lowering capital costs. We talked about unlocking private investments, South-South investments. We talked about justice questions. And we also got a stark warning not to keep on holding on to outdated technologies such as burning coal and gas. Thank you so much for this great discussion. I really appreciate all your inputs and I really appreciate those great questions. That's a wrap. Thank you.